Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to another edition of Climbing the Tactics Training Ladder. All right, so I'm about ready to do some problems. Let's jump in. And I'm 1466, last time we left off. Just to recap, I'm working my way up from the default level of 1200 on the chess.com Tactics Trainer, seeing how high I can take it, and explaining my thought process as I solve these. So Rook H8 check here. Black is trying to promote the pawn this way. Well, it doesn't look like I have too much of a choice at the moment. I guess I could play King G4, or King G3, of course. And in the event of King G4, White would have to play Rook G8 check to stop me from queening. And then I could block with my Rook, so Rook G5. And then let's say the Rooks get swapped off because that's all forced, and we like looking at forced lines when we're solving tactics puzzles. Then King F2, and I believe Black will win because after King F4, King takes G2, King E3, we will secure the queening square. We'll be able to control D1, and we'll be able to promote that D pawn. That looks like the most direct way here. King G3 wouldn't blow anything, but King G4, Rook G8 check, Rook G5 looks nice and easy. And I like how straightforward that entire sequence is. Rook G5, we trade the rooks. King F2, King F4, taking the opposition. King takes G2, King E3, game over. So let's go ahead and play that one out. Block with the rook. Okay, and it didn't force us to go any further. I wonder if I can click. Last time I didn't do this, but if I click the analysis button, it's going to show me the moves and what the correct way of playing is. So yeah, after King G4, Rook G8 check, Rook G5, this just ends. But let's say we take this a little bit further. White has to play King F2 to stop the pawn, and now this move is important. If Black were to simply advance this pawn, then White is just in time to catch it. On the other hand, King F4, if you watch my King and Pawn versus King videos I did a couple months ago, you'll know that this is the correct move, taking the opposition. And take, and then here. And if White tries to get back with their king, trying to control the D1 square, we just go right in front, and we're simply going to bring up this pawn and then get out of the way and advance that pawn to victory. Okay, so nice one to start here. Let me go back to this, and we'll proceed to the next problem. We got 5 points for that one. I'll take it. Knight D7. Remember, we're solving for accuracy. We're not so much worried about solving these quickly. We want to get them right. Very important, especially if you're first starting out in chess. You got to focus on getting these 100% correct before you build up your speed. So Knight D7. Material-wise, White is down a couple pawns here. I notice that the queens are opposing each other with White's knight in the middle. We like to look at forcing moves, so bishop takes h7 check certainly jumps out. Let's follow that path. Black would have to play king h8. Now, I see that I can play my rook up to e4, attacking the black queen, and then that might buy me enough time to swing the rook over to h4. So bishop takes h7 check, king h8, rook e4, and let's say the queen goes to c5, for instance. Can't go to d5 because the knight protects. So queen c5, rook h4, and that's looking dangerous for black because not only is the bishop under attack, but we're threatening discoveries with our bishop. Like even bishop g8 check is a threat there. King takes g8, queen to h7 mate. So barring something much better, I'm going to go with this line because I like how I can use the e4 square with tempo and swing up the rook into the attacking equation. Not too many other moves that even jump out here. I mean, we could kick the black queen around with a move like b3, but yeah, taking h7 and then proceeding with rook e4 looks to get the job done. Note that we have the f1 square covered by the other rook, so after bishop takes h7, king h8, rook e4, black cannot play queen f1 for fear of losing their queen. So let's do this one. Bring the rook up. Yep, queen c5, and now this. Okay, and here we're going to get to play that line that I was illustrating or discussing, bishop g8 check, and now bring the queen in. Note that if we had played instead here a bishop move back on the same diagonal, like bishop g6 or bishop f5, then black's going to be able to hold by playing king g8 because our queen will not have access to h7. It's important, if we explore this problem, that as soon as we had the possibility of a bishop check, that we choose exactly bishop g8. Like for this is probably still good for white, but it's not as direct and forcing. All right, so 2 for 2 so far. We're 1496, gaining some points. Bishop back to c7. We have equal material here. Black's king is suspiciously placed on f7. I think black would prefer it to be like in the corner on h8. Some checks that come to mind. Knight h6 check. I see that right away, and you know what? That is, again, a straightforward continuation that looks winning, because knight h6 check, black must take with their pawn. King g8 is illegal. Black's king cannot cross to the e-file. Moreover, the g6 square is covered by our queen. So g takes h6, and then queen takes h7 is checkmate. A nice little epaulette mate there with the f8 square and the f6 square covered by black's own pieces. Just double checking that line, I don't see any way black can even deviate. This is just a mate in 2. And if I spot a mate in 2, I might look briefly for a mate in 1, but I'm going with a mate in 2. So let's do this. Queen takes h7 checkmate. Yep. And we got 14 points for that. Yeah, not much beyond what we just discussed to really talk about. Yeah, black would much prefer the king to be in the corner. That would make him feel a lot safer, and the h7 pawn would be covered. Okay, let's keep forging onward. Bishop f8. First thing that screams at me is that white has pressure on f7. So we've got 1, 2, and 3 pieces lined up on that square. Black has 3 defenders, the queen, the rook, the bishop, and also the king, so 4. We could sacrifice on d5. This is a forcing move. Deflect black's rook, and then try to crash through on f7. That just catches my eye because we're removing a defender with rook takes d5, and we're making the black rook take, another defender, gone. So rook takes d5, bishop takes f7. Let's say king h8. And then what? Bishop takes d5, rook takes d5. And you know what? At the end of that line, the bishop on f8 is loose. So that seems promising, the fact that this bishop is undefended at the very end of this variation. Bishop takes f7 is certainly a move we'd want to look at as well, because it's a capture with check, ultra forcing, but doesn't seem to pan out. Black could simply take with their bishop. Maybe there's something to do with e6 there, but rook takes d5 looks so strong, and we're coming out material ahead with no risk. I am probably going to go for that. One other line we might want to look at, rook takes d5, bishop takes f7, queen takes f7, but then rook takes f7, and if he tries to play rook d1, pinning the queen to the king, we have rook takes f8 check. And then if rook takes f8, we can snatch that rook on d1. It would be undefended. So let's do this. Take here, check. And if black were to go to h7, it wouldn't make any difference. So now let's grab this rook and pick up the bishop at the end of the line. All right. So 6 points on that one. Just exploring that line. So the other variation I mentioned is if queen takes f7, then take. And we just want to do our due diligence and go a little bit further in the line to diffuse rook d1, because I could see rook d1 maybe being an issue. Possibly white could try bishop e1 here, but I think it's even better to chop off that bishop on f8, because black's rook on d8 is overloaded. It was trying to defend the bishop and the rook on d1. So if we just make it move, we're up too much material. Or the better move, I suppose, for black would be something like king h7, but if we take here, again, we're going to be up too much material. Next one. White plays knight e4. So black has an attack going against white's king, no doubt about it. We've got the queen down on h3. We like queens in close proximity to the enemy king. They can create threats. Black has invested material to get here, though. So with this light square bishop being part of the attack as well, I really would like to go bishop f3 to set up a checkmate on g2 or h1. But if we play bishop to f3 immediately, white will take. Queen takes f3. Another move that jumps out is rook h5, trying to set up queen h1 checkmate. That's got to be at the top of our list. How does white even prevent that? They'd have to play... Not too clear, actually. They'd have to play knight f6 maybe, but we just take it. Our king is a little open, but there's mates on h2 and h1. So rook h5, I'm not seeing a defense for white. You would think it would be something more forcing and sacrificial, and if we had the time, we would look at moves like queen takes f1 and stuff, maybe give them a quick glance, but rook h5 setting up the battery has got to be the way forward. Yeah, I'm not seeing how white avoids mate. If they could quickly play like bishop g5, bishop h4 and disrupt the coordination between the black queen and the rook, they might do that, but that's not happening here. So let's do it. Yep, knight f6, we're just going to take that. Problem over. That one seemed unusually easy. We only got 2 points for it, so other people must have thought this problem to be easy as well. Yeah, not much to discuss there. Let's keep going. Okay, knight e4. So the queen is under attack, and we've got a couple forcing moves. Rook d8 check, queen takes h6, queen d8. All those are moves that we'd want to examine. Queen takes h6 is the move I would look at immediately because we pick up a pawn with check and we also save our queen. So after queen takes h6, 2 ways black can respond. Rook h7 or king g8. So let's try to refute both of those branches. So on queen takes h6 check, rook h7, we have queen f8 checkmate. And on queen takes h6 check, king g8, we have rook d8. Oops. I went up to the top here. Sorry about that. So rook d8, and then black would have to block with their queen, and we just take their queen, rook takes e8, also checkmate. Yeah, I mean, rook d8 check to begin with. Black could play king h7. I looked at queen takes h6 there, giving up the queen. King takes h6, rook h8, but black has rook h7. That's not leading anywhere. But this, on the other hand, is conclusive. Let's bring the rook in. Black's rook is poorly placed on g7, takes away some squares from his king and can't be used to block these checks. Or it could be used in the other line I mentioned. So knight e4 here, rook h7, but that runs into queen f8 mate. So black's rook is clumsy all around. Next one. Queen c6. All right, so checks here. We have rook e8. Queen takes d7, which we would discard immediately. And also this move, bishop a5 and queen a5. But bishop a5 I like because that's including a piece that is kind of lurking in the background, but maybe is not making its presence felt yet. Also, this move appeals to me because the black queen is only defended by that b pawn. And if I could get that b pawn to move, I could pick up the queen. Moreover, this knight on d7 is pinned. So if bishop a5 check, black's options are narrow. Blocking with the queen doesn't work. Playing b6 would lose the queen on c6. Blocking with the knight on b6 is illegal. So the only other move is king to c8. Note that black cannot go to the e file due to our rook. But after king c8, our rook is swooping in. Rook e8 checkmate. Sometimes you want to look at different move orders of the same idea. Here, that isn't too relevant. Rook e8 check right away wouldn't make sense because black would just take it. Trading the queens wouldn't make sense because that gives black more options in the event of bishop a5. So this, on the other hand, is just winning. Take the undefended queen. Plus 13. Knight h5. So quick material count, it is equal. Black has thrown these pawns forward on the king side, so maybe their king is lacking some shelter that it normally would have otherwise. Like the pawn being back on g7 would undoubtedly be safer for black. Our queen is under attack, so we can't do stuff like knight takes g5. We could play queen to many squares. Well, probably 3 different squares. e5, g4, or h3. Bishop h7, I don't think is going to be working. King takes, I don't see a follow-up there. So I'm going to focus on the 3 queen moves that I just enumerated. Queen e5 doesn't look particularly forcing. I don't see what our follow-up threat would be. I guess we're threatening queen e4 in that case, forking the rook on a8 and also the h7 square, threatening queen h7 mate. So we could do that, but Arguably, black could just play bishop b7 in reply and cover e4. The nice thing about queen h3 is that we attack the knight, and if the knight were to move again, we could win that pawn on h6 behind it. So that would be the front runner for me. If queen g4, probably the knight can go back to f6 with an attack on the queen. I don't see what we've gained. So let's say queen h3, and then knight f4, queen takes h6, and we'll keep going with the forcing moves. Let's say knight takes d3. Because if we capture back on d3, maybe queen takes d3, and black's queen could participate in the defense and perhaps go to the g6 square. So tracking that line, queen h3, knight f4, queen takes h6, knight takes d3, I notice that we have knight takes g5, threatening queen h7 mate at the end of that line. And that looks decisive. We don't have to pick up that knight. Instead, we can go for the h7 square. Yeah, if rook e8 there, we have queen h7 check, king f8, queen takes f7 mate. Other moves to look at after queen h3, I mean, we could consider briefly knight f6 or knight g7. In both cases, white's going to pick up h6, which appears disastrous for black. We've already looked at our truly forcing moves like bishop h7 and kind of concluded that they don't work. So let's do this one. Black jumps in. Let's take that. Okay, and the problem ended here, but if it had continued, so queen takes h6, knight takes d3, I was ready to play this move and threaten queen h7 checkmate. Crushing, winning for white. Next problem. King takes b6, so we have an endgame. King, queen, and pawn versus king, queen, and pawn. Now, if nothing else changes here, it looks drawish. Queen endgames are notoriously hard to win. Even if black didn't have the c-pawn, this could potentially be difficult to win. So this makes me think that there's some way to either favorably trade queens or win black's queen. I say favorably trade queens because white's pawn is a bit further advanced to that promotion square on h8. Black's pawn hasn't moved, so it's a long ways from c1. So if we could engineer a queen trade here and win the pawn race, then we might win the game. So probably it's going to be a check. So looking at our checks, we have queen e3, queen d4, queen b4, queen f6, queen h6. I would say, probably queen e3, although queen e3 maybe c5 and black can advance that pawn and block the check. Okay, so sometimes it's helpful to try to figure out like which square you would offer the queen trade on. Okay, and now I didn't consider a square that should be pretty important. Queen f2 check. So if we play queen f2 check, queen takes f2, king takes f2, then we're getting our wish. We're trading queens. And yeah, if black were to push his pawn, we're gonna queen first, or actually more importantly, our king can stop the pawn. So let's say queen f2 check, queen takes f2, king takes f2, c5, h5, c4. At that point, white can play king to e2 and step into the square of the pawn. We could even wait for c3 if we wanted, but c4, king e2 is good. And we can use our king to stop black's pawn, but black does not have that luxury. Their king is too far away. So in my eyes, the only line to check would be queen f2, queen takes f2, king takes f2, and then if black tried to run the king back before even moving their pawn. So if black were to play like king c6 or king c5, we can use the rule of the square, though, and draw a imaginary line from h4 to h8, and then make that line equidistant. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares up the board, and we can count h4 and make it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares across the board as well, and extend the line further from d4 to d8 and create this box. And the rule is if the enemy king could step into that box, then they are capable of catching the pawn. But here it doesn't look like black can. So queen f2, queen takes f2, king takes f2, let's say king c6, h5, yeah, and black's not getting in the box. King d6, h6, king e6, h7. He's one square too short. King f7, and we queen. So that appears to check out. Maybe one other line is queen f2, queen c5 if black blocks the check, but then we can push pawn h5, not trade the queens yet, but instead push the pawn And once again, the queens are going to come off the board and black's king will be too far away. Okay, so let's do this. Yeah, trade. Black's going to try to get their king involved, but he's going to be one square too short. Yeah, problem over. And if we had extended that, we'll just see for ourselves. King e6, h7, king f7, white queens. And wins the game. Or alternatively, if c5 here, we can push. c4. White's king is close enough to assist. We could even push again or play king e2. Either one's going to win. As soon as the pawn gets here, now we can do that. You wouldn't want to keep pushing because if you do this, yes, you do queen first, but black also queens, and unless white has a way to skewer and win the black queen, they're not going to win the game. And queen b8, hoping for king c6 or king c5 so you can go queen c8 check is exactly that, hope chess. King a6 and black's fine. Position's a draw. So instructive there. I explained that box thing kind of weird. It was hard to explain without being able to draw arrows, but that's just a shorthand way to determine if an enemy king can stop a passed pawn. So I don't know if I can draw arrows on here. I don't think so, but if you just imagine a box formed by the squares h4 to h8, and then h8 to d8, down to d4, and over to h4 again, black can't bring their king into the box immediately on their next move, so we know that they're not going to be able to stop the pawn. Okay, we're doing well today. Let's hope we can keep it up. Queen takes d4. Now, in my first chess fundamentals video, if you recall the topic, good job, you've been paying attention, I talked about undefended pieces because at lower levels, and for many of you watching this, undefended pieces decide many of your games. So you leaving your pieces on undefended squares and your opponent doing the same. And whoever can exploit that in superior fashion often just goes on to win the game. Brings to mind the famous saying that the winner of a chess game is the player who makes the second to last mistake or the second to last blunder. And I mention that here because black has some loose pieces in this position. That should be immediately clear. The queen on d4 is undefended. The bishop on e6 is undefended. The knight on a5 is undefended. So we would look at our usual forcing moves like, queen h5 check, bishop takes c6. But we would also try to use those undefended pieces as a reference point, as a context clue for what we're looking at. And queen h5 check is forking the king and the knight over on a5. We have to bear in mind our own undefended pieces. With queen takes d4, black is threatening our loose bishop on a4. So what I like about queen h5 check is that after black deals with the check, let's say bishop f7 maybe, queen takes a5, we're simultaneously defending our loose bishop on a4. So it's a double whammy. We pick up one of black's loose pieces and we secure one of our own. What's not to like about that? So I'm just briefly going to look for some other moves, but the rest of white's position doesn't impress. I mean, this knight on d2 is awkward. It blocks our bishop. We don't have any of our queenside pieces developed. This bishop isn't going to be doing much damage. Bishop takes c6 makes no sense. So queen h5, on the other hand, is looking correct. And we passed. Okay. So remember the maxim LPDO. LPDO is an acronym. It stands for loose pieces drop off. That's been mentioned in more than one chess book, and I think it's something that beginners especially should keep in mind. Use those loose pieces as a starting point for your calculations, and try to minimize the loose pieces in your own camp. So black's last move was kind of reckless. Queen takes d4. They probably should have played something maybe like b5, attacking white's bishop. Then after bishop b3, they could play knight takes b3, and maybe later try to take this pawn. Next one. Rook takes d8. All right, so we're in check, meaning our options are limited. It's going to be between king e7 and bishop e8. No other choices. So we see that white is skewering our king to our rook here. So if king e7, the natural move we'd consider thereafter is rook takes h8. I notice that white's king is naked, though, with this rook coming down to d8 and then hypothetically taking the rook on h8. White's king is completely lacking defenders. And in that position, we would have queen e1 checkmate, taking away the flight squares d1 and d2. So I like that. King e7, getting out of the check, encouraging white to take our rook. White doesn't have to take the rook, but if they don't, it appears that black will just be up a piece. On the other hand, if we play bishop e8, we're stuck in a pin, and I feel like white has more options in that case. Like queen b4 check is a move we'd have to consider. Whereas with king e7, it's nice because we're hitting the rook, and white can't afford to play like queen b4 check, just allowing king takes d8. So yeah, I don't see any issue with king e7. The d7 square is covered by our bishop, so king e7, queen d7 is not possible. Looks good. And queen e1 mate. So this is maybe an example of taking the line a little bit further than you may be accustomed to. So if you only saw that after king e7 you were going to lose your rook, you'd be tempted to just give up the line there because you're like, oh, I'm losing an entire rook. How is this line possibly good? I am down a bishop for a rook at the end. So one piece of advice I have, when you're calculating a forced line, always try to take your calculations 1 or 2 ply further. So just go like a half move or a full move further before you cut things off and make a conclusion, because you might find something that your opponent overlooked, and that could be the difference maker. So a materialistic person might just play bishop e8 here because they're afraid of losing h8. Next problem. Rook takes a6. So white is up a bishop right now, but that's a awfully pinned bishop, isn't it? Yeah, it can't move because white's queen on e1 would be lost. However, I don't think we can take it because rook takes e2, rook takes e2, and even though white has a weak back rank, that's an important thing to note here. These pawns on h2 and g2 are kind of stopping white's king from ever coming up to escape a back rank check. Even though they have a weak back rank, rook takes e2, rook takes e2 is not the way to take advantage. However, beyond this capture, I would also look at queen takes f2. Queen takes f2, queen takes f2 doesn't appear to work as well, though, because if rook d1 check, white could play something like bishop takes d1, rook takes d1 check, queen g1, and that's all flash and no substance for black. We take the queen and we're down a rook at the end of the equation. What if we play rook d1 to start, though? So pinning the white queen to the king. So rook d1, if bishop takes d1, queen takes e1 check is going to be mating. So rook d1, queen takes d1 looks to be almost forced. And then rook takes d1, bishop takes d1, again queen e1 check, and that's leading to checkmate. I guess I shouldn't say that rook d1, queen takes d1 is forced. Certainly white could play some other move like rook f1 or rook a1, but in either case we're picking up the queen, and black has no material problems at that point and is probably just winning even more material. White's coordination is pretty poor here. There's nothing white can do against our king to throw a spanner in the works. I'm just looking for like random checks or attacks that white could play after rook d1, because rook d1, it's not quite a forcing move. It's not a check or a capture. So white does have some leeway in how they could respond. It's close, though. It's a major threat. Yeah, queen g1, I didn't really consider that move, but safe to say we could take the queen here. Just checking to see if there's anything else. Queen takes f2 could be played. Maybe that's an even better move. I guess he has bishop takes d1, though, in that case. So probably we should just take the queen and then, I don't know, maybe rook d2 thereafter looks pretty strong. Yeah, because if queen takes f2 here, bishop takes d1 gives white a fighting chance. So let's just take the queen. Yeah, problem over. You're never quite sure when you're solving these. Like sometimes they go further than you would think they would, and sometimes they just cut the problem off at a moment where you're ready to play a few more moves. It depends. Okay, so we're up to 1544. Most importantly, we're solving accurately. We like that. Okay, here, so material-wise, white is up a couple pawns. He's up 2 pawns. White has some knights that are kind of far-flung. So this knight on g5 and this knight over on a4. I noticed that especially the knight on a4 is offsides, potentially. I mean, the knight on g5 is 2, but the knight on g5 is kind of menacing, attacking our bishop. I'm not really sure what this knight on a4 is doing. So my eyes are drawn to that. And I see that white's queen is the only thing defending it. If we could disrupt that defense of the knight, then we could be winning that piece. Also, white has played this pawn forward to a3, so they've weakened the b3 square. And the b3 square also stands out because we have 1, 2, and 3 pieces aimed on that square. And of all the pieces that could go there, I like the bishop going to b3 the best because that creates an immediate threat on the queen. The knight or the rook coming to b3 would not create as big of a threat. I mean, the knight would threaten the rook in the corner, but bishop b3, that's a threat that white really has to respond to. And we sever the defense of a4 in playing that move as well. So it's a tempo move that should enable us to pick up the knight after white moves their queen. We might want to look at where the queen could go if white could create any major threats after bishop b3 to mess us up, but note that the h5 square is covered by black's knight. So if white tried to play queen h5, I don't know, trying to threaten h7, even black's knight covers that square, but that's not going to work. So I think this is the way to go. Let's do it. Yeah, white moves the queen, and let's pick up the free knight. All right, we passed. So a couple things here. The knight being on the side of the board was a signal that we may look at ways to take advantage of that. Also that weak b3 square, as I was saying. We have many pieces bearing down on that square, and bishop b3 just happens to be the best way of exploiting it. Let's do 2 more problems. King c2, white escapes the check. Kind of a messy position here. Black's king is looking rather odd. Also, black's rook on d8 is undefended. So looking at checks, queen c1 comes to mind. That would lose our knight. King takes d3, but I see we have this follow-up check, bishop a6, which is nearly checkmate. Our queen controls the e3 and d2 squares, and that bishop controls c4 and e2 and puts white in check. Our pawn on e5 controls d4. So the only way white could escape mate is knight b5, but then bishop takes b5 is checkmate. So that's a nice line right off the bat. Queen c1 check, king takes d3, bishop a6. Knight b5, bishop takes b5, mate. So queen c1, maybe white would have to play king b3, but after queen takes b2, it's going to be mate or something very bad for white. Just to confirm that, king c4 runs into bishop a6 again. King a4 would run into, what, queen c2 checkmate? Yeah, I think that's mate. Knight c5 is also good. That would win the queen, but queen c2 mate ends the game. So I'm liking queen c1. And it doesn't give white a chance to get at our king or pick up the rook on d8 with check. So let's do this. Yeah, white chooses to go that direction. So let's take this. King c4. Bishop a6 is mate in 2 as far as I can tell. I'm just making sure there's not a mate in 1. Yeah, there's not going to be a mate in 1, so let's do that. And we passed. I wonder what the trouble is with this problem, like why some people might get this wrong. Queen c1 is the only logical check. Note that e2 is covered by white's knight. f2 is covered by the rook. So there's no other really good check. So just got to follow your forcing moves here and see it to completion. And again, if queen c1, king takes d3, then we have bishop a6, and it ends very similarly with mate. All right, last problem. So h6. This position somehow looks familiar. Looks very familiar, like I've seen it in a game somewhere. Okay, so black is up in exchange, a rook for a bishop. 2 rooks against white's rook and bishop, but white has this potentially dangerous h-pawn. I noticed that black's king is on f3, and we have these discovered checks possible by, for instance, taking the pawn on f4. Our rook on h3 would deliver check, but it appears like white's king is going to slip away maybe to like the b4 square. So taking a pawn with check is what I would do if this were a bullet game, but is there something better? Also, is there something sneaky involving like using this rook as well, like a move like e5, trying to open up the avenue against this rook and also hit the bishop? It doesn't appear to work right away. e5, rook takes c6, take d4, king takes d4. But it could be part of the equation. Also, there's just king e4 check, which it doesn't win a pawn, but we are attacking the bishop with our king. So white would have to get out of the check, like king b4 or king d2, and then we just pick up that piece. And blocking with the bishop on e3 or the rook on g3 doesn't work. So king e4 Looks like it picks up a minor piece, no problem. And with our rook on h3, white's h-pawn is not going anywhere. We control the advance to h7. I don't think there's going to be a checkmate or anything here, so yeah, let's just go get that bishop. Pick this guy up. All right, and we passed. So we gained 1 point with that last problem, and we got all our problems right in this session. We gained some points as a result, too. I went up about 100 points. We didn't gain as many points as we maybe could have if we were like immediately playing our moves, but I took enough time where I felt like virtually certain about the answers. And I'm just going to keep harping on that with you guys. If you want to get better, that's what you need to do initially. You can work up to speed later. If you're already a competent player and a competent solver, you can start solving a bit more for speed, but you shouldn't be making moves in your tactics training problems that you're not certain about or close to certain. All right, because in your games, you wouldn't want to, in a tactical position, just go out on a limb and say, oh, like I'll just make this move and see what happens. No, you want to be certain about your calculations and have that confidence to back up your lines. So hope you guys enjoyed this solving session, and I'll be back again soon with another one of these. Leave me any feedback in the comments. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Talk to you later.